welcome to you all to tonight's Cloud Debate. This is our last one for the year, so I am extra pleased to see you all. My name is Ylva Rodney-Gomede, and I am the head of the International Office here at University of Johannesburg, and also Professor of Communications for those of you who have not been with us before. Tonight we're going to focus on women in the Fourth Industrial Revolution, and having just celebrated Women's Month, I think this is extra important. And we'll be talking about the contributions that women make to the tech space and the evolution and revolution that the Fourth Industrial Revolution presents. Women often lead in this space through displaying leadership skills that talk to creativity, communication, collaboration, and critical thinking, skills all highly valued in the contemporary workspace and increasingly important for an innovative economy. This said, the stats shows that women's participation and contribution to the tech space and the Fourth Industrial Revolution is still unequal, and that access is also still unequal in terms of education and the skills needed to lead. These are some of the things then that we will be discussing tonight. And with me, I have a fantastic, of course, all-female panel tonight. And first, I have Juanita Clark, who is the co-founder and the Chief Executive Officer of Digital Council Africa, an organization founded in 2010 that she also then co-founded after realizing the need for awareness and education with regards to the role of high-speed fiber network in the telecommunications industry in South Africa. It's lovely to have you with us, Juanita. And it's going to be fantastic interacting with you and hearing some more about then Digital Council Africa. Also with us, we have Mindeka Harry, who is the founder of Youth for Technology, a foundation, a non-profit foundation, I should say, and an international one that focuses on empowering the next generation of leaders with skills they need to access employment or to create their own entrepreneurial opportunities in the Fourth Industrial Revolution and in the tech space that we will be discussing tonight. So a warm welcome to you, Mindeka. It's absolutely lovely to have you with us. And last but not least, my colleague here at UJ, Dr. Stella Mvuma, who is the head of the Department of Applied Information Systems in the College of Business and Economics. Stella has a passion for ICTs, and particularly with the link then back to the Fourth Industrial Revolution and ICT adoption. And her research focuses on ICT adoption in small and medium-sized enterprises. So I'm sure Stella will have a lot to contribute to the tech space, and particularly then around the idea of women leading in this space, and particularly when it comes then to small and medium-sized enterprises, which is something that I know that Mindeka will be able to talk to as well, and the entrepreneurial space then that's needed in this when we talk about women's participation. So my first question to my panelists tonight is focusing on some of the things that we would like them to address, particularly with regards to the disparities and the gender disparities in this space. How strong do you think that the gender disparities are, or the gender gap in the Fourth Industrial Revolution? Let me turn firstly to you, Mindeka. What do you think is the gap here?
Well, great. Thank you. Thanks, Professor Yilda, for that introduction. It's really a humbling honor to be here with you all this afternoon and evening, so thank you for that. This is such an important and imperative topic, and it really cannot be overemphasized, right? This idea of the gender gap. In 2014, the World Economic Forum released the Gender Gap Report. And the Gender Gap Report indicated that there will not be gender parity until 2095. Mm-hmm. However, that report was recently updated, I believe in 2018, and it indicated that it will take 117 years from now to reach gender parity, right? And so as a mother of 3 daughters myself, I wouldn't see gender parity until my children's children, in essence. And so in my lifetime, that probably will not be possible. So this issue is very pertinent, it's very relevant. The bottom line is that Women need to be a part of fundamental decisions made in and by technology companies regarding product development, regarding innovation, because women have a critical role to play. I mean, given that, women are responsible for about 80% worldwide of consumer spending. How can you develop products without including women into the value chain and without including their ideas into product development? So, gender parity, gender equality is critical. We have the data. We understand what systemic changes are necessary to enable this gap to be bridged. And it requires all hands on deck to be able to fulfill that.
Well, thank you for that. And I think that it's interesting that you say as well that you have 3 daughters and the generational, the generations that it's going to take actually to bridge this gap. And I think that if we can do anything to speed that up, and I think we'll come back to that question. But I'm going to turn to you, Juanita, with regards to this gender gap. How big is the gap, and from your perspective, what is it that you're seeing right now?
It is still very big. Unfortunately, one only has to go to and walk through the boardrooms and through the passages of some of the companies. And unfortunately, very often I'll find myself in a boardroom as the only woman, amongst my male colleagues. I'd like to say that I think that it's changed. I think, we've seen in some managerial positions, maybe not at CXO level, but definitely at managerial levels, we've seen some changes. I'm also finding that it's a conversation that we're not shying away from. It's something that requires conscious decision making. It requires a certain effort. It's not something that's going to change. And I hear what my colleague Njideka is saying, and it's frightening to think that so many generations will still experience bias. However, I do believe that, and I don't know if you'll agree with me, but it's like in the last 2 years, there's been such powerful movements globally that we are experiencing, and that's accelerating and breaking down, these historical views. And I'd like to believe that, the more conversations we have, such as this one, the faster and the more we will speed it up. I always say that, it's one thing to speak for and on behalf of women, but at the same time, men need to have a conversation. They have to understand and reinvent themselves, because it's one thing for women to say, we want equality. And we're having these conversations. And here we are tonight, talking to each other, talking about having an equal bite at the apple. I'm just not seeing that our male counterparts are having the exact conversation to say, well, if women are stepping into these roles, then where does that leave us? And unfortunately, until we start having those conversations, I'm concerned that, we will not have equality in the true sense of the word, and we won't make the progress that is desired.
I hear you, and I think it's interesting that you say that we're, that there are concerns over progress, and I guess that's what Njideka also actually alluded to, this idea that it's going to take generations to bridge the gap. Stella, as a researcher, as a lecturer as well, and someone who then teaches and lectures on these aspects, what is your take on it?
Good evening, everyone, and to my fellow panelists. I think for me, my fellow panelists have just tabled it out in terms of giving the reality on the ground. And that is, the data don't lie. In my world, when you present data, that's the true reflection of what's happening. Research data speaks for itself. And I think while women are, have been making incredible strides in the tech industry, when it comes to diversity and inclusion, there's still a long way to go. And in particular, in the tech space, the scary reality for me is that we may probably not see economic gender parity in our lifetime. That's really scary, because women are severely underrepresented in the tech industry. And that's a real problem, and that we need to tackle and deal with. Definitely, we need to eliminate the danger of the gender biases from the workplace to really encourage fair representation of all groups before it's too late, if it's not too late at all. And I think the algorithms around us inherit our social biases. And of course, we do acknowledge that there is progress. The question is it enough for us to be complacent, to really say it's okay, or we are making, those slight progress? Absolutely not. I mean, we're saying despite the progress that, is being made, we simply cannot accept the inequality, and do nothing about it. More needs to be done to address the gender inequality. And this is especially important for me at a time when our workplaces are dramatically changing due to the technological advancement that we see in areas such as artificial intelligence and blockchain. I think what we want to see in terms of inclusivity is for all of us to connect. And when we talk connectivity, it cannot be one-sided. We want all the alpha and the omegas, to partake equally so. And I'm really saying we need technologies that will help us to mitigate these biases that we see of human and to be proactive in recognizing opportunities in those bias spaces and interrupt them. I mean, if there's any disruption that we need to make, we urgently need that digital disruption of inequality. We need more women in IT spaces for us to manage the risk of implementing the bias technology, because technologies that are developed, may or reflect the biases of people who build them. I'm scared of software developers who are male, that are developing, these algorithms about women that are going to impact us. I think it is well known that a lot of AI technologies are biased, and that is why women must get involved to provide the expertise of what these technologies can do and cannot do. So yeah, thanks.
Let's stay with the gender gap and try to understand as well where it comes from and what compounds it. So I imagine that the gender gap in the tech industry or in the broader sort of participation in a tech economy is a reflection of gender gaps and gender inequalities in society more broadly. However, I also imagine that it is compounded by a lot of factors. We know that there's an information industry gap, for example, a gap between the tech haves and have-nots, for example, which is, of course, very compounded in our own context, in an African context, in a Southern African context, in a developing world context as well. And I think that's something that we also need to understand and see how does that impact the gender gap that we see, particularly then, as I say, maybe in our own context. And I'm going to let Njeka come in here as well, because you sit with a slightly different context, but I know you have a good understanding of this as well. But maybe, Juanita, you as a South African and working in South Africa, how do you look upon this?
I am incredibly concerned about the digital divide, but not only that. I think the pandemic has clearly illustrated that there's a lot of work that needs to be done. We have to absolutely pull out every stop, and we haven't got a day to lose, not a single day to lose in terms of finding methods and remedies to narrow the digital divide and to bring everybody onto an equal footing. So, and more so, young girls. We need to encourage young girls to participate in STEM. We need to, do a lot more research to understand what the future holds, where the opportunities are, and again, what I said earlier, it needs to be a specific and a certain effort. We have to go and find them, and we have to teach them, and we have to identify them, and we have to raise them up. It's through identification and taking somebody's hand and showing them that they can do it, that we will overcome it. And I think that what Njeka was saying about, the amount of time that it will take to overcome this and to have a greater equality is true, because we're not we're not addressing the root cause, which is how we are raised, the expectations, even from our mothers, even as women, there are still biases towards our sons and our daughters and the specific careers that they have to get into. So I think it's critically important that we start at the very beginning, that we address equality at a school level, that we enable and empower our teachers to already at that level tell our children that they're equal, to encourage participation in STEM. But in order for us to do all of that, we have to close this digital divide, and we have to give everybody equal access to information, so that those girls that want to participate in this digital economy can do so simply because they've got access to a device, they've got access to affordable connectivity, and they can teach themselves and raise themselves up.
No, thank you for that. Imagine, Stella, that you see this in a university context as well, and how these things then get compounded. And I'm sure that you have reflected a lot about this now when we've been working also online because of the COVID pandemic.
Absolutely. I mean, I agree with Juanita in terms of helping girls access training and educational opportunities in STEM. I mean, that needs a stronger emphasis. And nonetheless, I think we must not be short-sighted to presume that all technological advancement are automatically helpful. You have indicated my research areas in ICT for development, and I think it's looking at the development of really the African child. I'm concerned about when we talk technology to someone who's from the village where I grew up or from the township where I come from. What technologies are we pitching to them, and how are we packaging this education to the young girl in that area so that it doesn't look like a kind of an alpha environment. For me, again, it's said that in this precious country of ours, South Africa, women represent only 13% of graduates in the STEM discipline. I mean, only 13%. We cannot be okay with that. In fact, no one should be okay with that percentage. Is ridiculous. Again, I think the recent annual ICT skills survey that indicated a drop in female ICT practitioners from 27% in 2018, to 16% in 2019. And yet again, the technology organization led by women are thriving and showing higher return on investment than those that are led by the men. So I think we need to urgently change the perceptions around technology, and there's a need to do more support and inspire women to enter the tech industry. But let's talk the right language to the right people. Don't bring the European language into our townships and our village, because our young girls will not understand when we pitch in that language.
It's an interesting thing that you talk about. Of course, we deal in the university space. We deal with young people, and Njideka, you have a foundation that tries to empower youth in particular. Do you see these gender disparities even within a youth foundation such as yours?
Absolutely. It's interesting because really gender equality, right, and access to technology, in my view, is actually a basic human right. So it should be accessible, it should be affordable to every single person on the planet. And the notion of girls' access to technology is not just a fairness objective, it's actually an economic imperative, where we see direct bottom line impact to net income, to the percent of patents that are designed and are out there with products designed by women. It has a direct economic imperative. So it's no longer just soft and fuzzy. Over 20 years ago, my vision for Youth for Technology Foundation was born sitting at a cubicle at Microsoft, where I first started off my corporate career here in the US. had grown up in Nigeria, lived the first 18 years of my life in Nigeria, West Africa, and then moved to the United States in pursuit of a college education. And the biggest gap that I saw was not necessarily social or economic, it was the use of technology in the classroom. And we're talking about the early 90s. And so when I found myself working in corporate America at the world's largest software company, I felt a compelling reason to do something, to change the lives of young people living in peri-urban and rural communities in the developing countries. Mm-hmm. However, as we all know, and as my colleagues, the other esteemed panelists have mentioned, pandemics exacerbate inequalities, right? None of us anticipated COVID-19, but what we have seen is that everyone is impacted in some way, shape, or form regarding this pandemic. At my backyard here in the US, where I'm physically located, speaking with you right now, we have children whose parents, after working 14-hour days, come home, take their children to a parking lot of Walmart or McDonald's to access free Wi-Fi so that their children can complete their classwork and their homework. In countries like Kenya, where Youth for Technology Foundation works, we've seen that with the pandemic, more and more girls are getting distracted, they're being left behind, they're in conditions and at adverse risk with rising rates in pregnancy for teenage girls. So we've seen the impact of this pandemic on these young people. Of course, not to even talk about the cost of data and their access to the technologies, given that it's not just data, it's actually hardware, right? The access to desktops and mobile devices to access the information. So in some cases, where the US has transformed to some virtual learning environment, I have 3 daughters that are right outside of my office as we speak in virtual class. They have access to Wi-Fi here in the US. Not all students do. In many countries in Africa, education has stopped completely, right? At least formal education, right? The schools in Kenya are closed until January. The schools in Nigeria, another country that we have a presence in, are closed for the most part until at least November, December. And so we already had an obsolete educational system, right? And right now, given this pandemic, that has stopped completely. We're trying to see ways in which we can continue to encourage informal learning at home as best possible until schools reopen. But I really think that, going back to look at the notion of the gender gap, when we look at, in countries like Kenya and Nigeria, and even developed countries like Spain and the US, let's touch on Kenya and Nigeria for a minute. In Nigeria, about 13% of women are engineers or have pursued careers in science, technology, engineering, and math. In Kenya, only 6% of the labor force are women engineers in Kenya. In countries like Spain, we have 18% of the women have pursued STEM and technology-related careers. In the US, 47% of women are in the labor force. About 26% of those women are in tech-related fields, right? But when we look at those women, they earn as much as they own only 85% as much as their male counterparts, doing exactly the same type of job. And so we're looking at not just gender disparities, but we're also looking at the economic disparities that come as a result of those gender disparities, right? At a time when most people have a trajectory in their careers, women in their early 30s have to make a very difficult decision: kids versus careers. And that is where a lot of them fall out of this pipeline, especially with technology companies, because they select family over careers. Also, it's the issue in the workplace, specifically with women in technology. Confidence versus competence, right? Males in technology, men in technology have as much as 30% more confidence than women in technology. They ask and get paid 4 times as much. They get more time off. They have more flexible schedules. But where women have succeeded in growing up, whether it's in elementary school and high school, where they get straight A's, it's different in the workplace. Women focus and they work and They expect someone to come behind them and tap them on their shoulder and give them the corner office. But that doesn't happen, because confidence is as important as competence in technology companies, in particular, in the world. And so these women are just as qualified, if not more qualified, but they see themselves not, going up the career ladder. They encounter so many more challenges than their male counterparts, because what may have worked in academics and in school does not work in the workplace in regards to technology. And so this notion of confidence is very, very important. It's almost as important as competence.
It's interesting you say that, and I'm going to just a couple of things that have come up on the chat here around then. How do we sort of neutralize some of the biases, but also if we want to leapfrog and try to cover some of this gap. So we talked a little bit about education, the role of STEM, for example, and how you then have to focus on STEM, of course, from early on in a lineage of education and throughout the schooling years and the lifespan of our schooling. But as you rightfully point out, and Jacob, it transplants itself, onto later on in life. When we enter the workforce, women then, as you say, have often choices then between a career or child rearing, for example, which of course is common in any space, not only in the tech space. But if you want to try and attempt to bridge some of this gap and make sure that women can leapfrog in to different careers and stay in those careers and have the confidence, as you pointed out, to do so, what do we need to do? I'm gonna put this question. Let's start with you, Stella, since you are in the higher education space. What do we need to do?
I think, of course, we already highlighted that the first thing is to educate and, to really dress this education the right way for women. You have to put the right attire, the right language, and the right timing. But I also want to say, digital gender equality requires the support of men as well as women. And, while I learned a lot from my male mentors, on how to operate in my own field, I found that I failed when I tried to imitate them directly. I think a lot of times we are not aware of our own biases as well. So first is to really recognize that we all have biases and understanding what groups of people we might subconsciously discriminate against. I think it's a must before we can start altering, other behaviors or even our own behaviors. But the most important thing, organizations, and I'm talking in particular decision makers, those male that are sitting in those boards, Juanita, that you spoke about, I think they have blood in their hands in terms of their responsibility on bridging the danger of gender disparities, that we're currently experiencing. I think every decision maker, needs to get professional analysis on unconscious bias training issues, such as having an all-male panel and seeing that as okay. Or unless we create a safe space for discussing issues related to digital gender equality and call out non-inclusive behavior. I recently read on social media that Vodacom has a gender-neutral employee benefits and encourages men to take parental leave. And I think senior leaders must set a positive example. Problems have been uncovered, in the recruitment of some technology companies where algorithms used in the HR processes exhibit a bias towards selecting the CV of men. And more specifically, the roles of artificial intelligence development. And I think eradication of this insidious effect can be achieved by supporting and encouraging more women into the leadership roles across the tech industry. So, of course, I think, we need women, but we cannot just appoint ourselves there. So in those boardrooms, in those decision-making, and those people that are drafting policies, they need to start shifting. Who's willing to really step down and allow women to step up? So I think this is a difficult challenge that we're facing. So even if we know what we need to do, we're really educating ourselves, but we need to work with men together and encouraging and making sure that we really eradicate this gender disparity in order to make an impact. And like I said, to participate in the economy. So it's a two-way traffic. I don't see us as women doing this alone. I think men needs to come on board.
It's interesting you say that, Stella, and I'm going to turn to you, Juanita, because I think that, this idea then of working together, but also there's a certain amount of education, over a certain amount of maybe education / convincing that needs to be done about women's contribution and what we can contribute. What is your take on that? What is it that women bring to this space? And I know you alluded to it a little bit at the beginning of the discussion, this idea that actually often technologies aren't developed for women either. So there's a lot of contributions that still need to come into this space, from women in particular.
I think it's widely accepted that women have a higher EQ than men. We're more sensitive to issues within the workspace. Because we come from a nurturing background, we create and strive to create environments that's more nurturing. We try and encourage. We're just more encouraging. But I just want to pick up on something that Stella said as well, Ilva. And I don't understand why corporate companies across the world are not specifically advertising for women. Why are they not making a certain amount of positions available on their board? And before you submit your CV, make it clear that this is a female role, or that this role will only, be filled by a female professional. We're very well, maybe to some, we can debate whether it's successful, but we're doing it in South Africa, with our BE, where we are trying to set the record straight and undo the wrongs of the past, and bring equality to the corporates. But for some reason, we're not doing it when it comes to gender, and I think that, that we should do it, and that we should give women an opportunity. And then just quickly, something else that Njadeka said that I found interesting. I've got a colleague she's a chief HR officer in a corporate environment, and we were talking about confidence the other day, and she said, and I said to her, why are we not, you're in HR, surely you see the CVs come across your desk. Why are you not, how come these women are not making it to the final round? And it was exactly that. It was exactly that question of confidence. Males will come in, and she said, there's 10 things on the CV that is required. And males will come in and they'll be able to do 5 things, and there'll be 5 things that they can't do. And they will consistently come in and sell themselves on the 5 points they can do. Women will come into the same interview, and they will consistently focus and try and work and talk themselves around the 5 things they cannot do. Mm-hmm. So it's also ourselves that are holding ourselves back by not focusing on the right areas, and sort of saying, I can only do these 5 things, but I'll figure the rest out as I go along. And that's what men do. Men don't. There is no person that is 100% suited to a particular position that's advertised. But men they will come in and they are confident enough to project this positive attitude and the confidence in terms of a particular role. Whereas women, on the other hand, will humble themselves, and they'll be incredibly apologetic about the couple of things that they cannot do. And I think, we need to work a little bit around that. And you know what? We're scared of asking. And I also think that corporates should have fixed policies in place. It comes back to this conversation of it needs to be a certain effort. We need to think about it. Corporates have to put a policy in place that says that we only pay equal. We're not even, everybody will receive equal pay for an equal, day's work. And it's not something, actually, if we think about it, it's not even something that we should have to ask for. That should be a mentality. And this is what comes out of the leadership's offices. CEOs in this industry need to filter it down. They need to bring their executive team around the table, and they need to lay down the rules. They need to say, we are striving for a certain percentage of female employees. We are striving for equal pay. Bring your people up to equality. We're striving for it from from every other point of view. Let's do it from a gender point of view as well. But it requires real and certain effort, and it's a conscious decision made by the leadership within a corporate company, well, in any company.
Yeah, it's interesting because, of course, when we talked a little bit, you mentioned HR and recruitment, for example. And of course, we know that in the modern economy, a lot of recruitment is done directly via technology or social media, for example. And I wonder sometimes, are women as good as using social media channels to promote themselves, for example? And Judith, if you look at the young people that you work with and your young daughters, for example, do you think that and boys and girls, young men, young women are using social media in the same way?
Sure. I mean, social media has really, I guess, revolutionized how we communicate, right? And so the different channels that the younger millennial generation communicate on these days, I mean, no one calls anyone anymore, right? It's not even text messaging. I mean, they're Snapchatting, right? They don't exchange phone numbers anymore, which is very interesting. I haven't quite caught up with Snapchat just yet, but one of my daughters do use Snapchat. But I think we've seen the ability for social media to democratize information as very powerful, whether in peace building or economic and social building across the continent and really across the world, right? It has the ability to get really concise messages out to mass numbers of people in a very short period of time. So that is really the democratization of information, which is extremely, extremely powerful. So I definitely see the strength there. You asked the question, Eva, which Juanita answered in her introduction, which was around, what skills do women have that, may be more interesting. And, we often say that women, and I think this is somewhat of a bias built on, years and years of social thought that really needs to be transformed, a mindset and a cultural shift where the pursuit of science, technology, engineering, and math should not be seen as a questioning of one's femininity, right? Boys aren't for STEM and then girls are for jewelry making or what have you, right? Research has actually demonstrated that when girls and boys are told that they can do as well on a math or a science assignment, they actually do as well in equal formats. Girls sometimes even do better. Globally, we have more postgraduate degrees. We have more law degrees. We have more MBAs. And we're catching up with science and technology. But the bottom line is that really this whole notion around competence and confidence is one that, follows us, like we mentioned, from very, very young through the workplace and really doesn't leave us there. And so what can other women in the workplace do? I think, we should be having a discussion around, there's a lot of talk around mentorship and why people should mentor other people. But what is actually more powerful, in my opinion, is actually a concept called sponsorship, right? And the difference between sponsorship and mentorship is that when someone is mentoring you, they talk to you. When someone is sponsoring you, they talk about you in ways that elevate your professional career, even when you don't know about it, right? And so they're in C-suite meetings and they're talking about you for your benefit and for your advancement. And so women should really look at, especially women, high up in their corporate career, when they think about how do we pay it forward, they should really look to getting someone else on the elevator with them and sponsoring them to, those higher levels, to really encourage that women just don't go into technology careers, but actually stay there and thrive there.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. I mean, I think that it's interesting because this idea of leading by example, role models, and sponsorships, as you say, mentorship. I think that that's also something that maybe we think about it later in our careers, for example, or when we look at them. You know, you say that women who are already in senior positions should take along. Is there something we need to do earlier on in this space as well? Is it creating role models already from when girls are younger? Well, even for boys actually in this space to so that we all can level the playing field if you wish. What would you say we could do? Juanita, if I turn to you first.
Sure. I think, you know, we're trying to overcome thousands and thousands of years of bias, and it's difficult. And I think the problem that we're facing is that it's in our homes, it's at school, it's, you know, female teachers, male teachers, our own parents. You know, it's everywhere you turn. It's you know, it's this very, very same problem that we're facing. It's important that we take hands. You know, and then we have this very broad conversation. I think if we had to look at the audience that's joined us tonight, I think that, you know, we will see again that it'll be mostly females, you know, the ones with a vested interest. And our male counterparts who are part of the problem and they're part of the solution are still not here, because it's again this conversation, you know, I think Stella said it earlier, for one woman to rise up, one man needs to step aside. And where are they stepping into, and what are they supposed to be doing? So I think it's really important that we come together as women, that we form groups that can support each other and that can carry each other. It's also, you know, it's very important, as Njideka was saying, that we find you know, sponsors and maybe for younger people, maybe it is a mentor. But, you know, it's also incredibly important for us to have soundboards. You know, every one of us has to have this one woman. You know, we're not on the golf course, you know, Friday afternoons. We don't go to the pub. We haven't got that sort of support structure. So you know, so I think it's important that we reach out and that we find somebody that you can talk to, that's non-judgmental, that is willing to be honest with you, to give you honest advice, to take your hand, and you know, to be that friend critic, but also, you know, that when it's tough, you know, to just be there for you. You know, I think it's easy to look at women that are in senior positions and to think that they've made it, but you know, every day is hard. It doesn't matter at what level you are in life. You know, you still have challenges. Nothing goes away when somebody puts a C, X, whatever in front of your name. You know, we're all mothers. You know, we all have to overcome challenges, and, you know, getting our kids all raised up through pandemics, and, you know, fixing all of these things. So it's important to have a support structure in place that can carry you.
Senior, yeah, I hear you. Senior leadership in our universities, Stella. How does that look when it comes to women and the tech space? You're a lecturer in this field. Are you the only one?
Well, I think sadly I would say something. I really don't like saying it. I'm really not a big fan of the line, I'm the first Black female to lead a department of applied information systems. It comes across as, you know, gross for me, because we shouldn't be having those type of lines in 2020. But I think the university is really doing well. I mean, I will tell you a little bit of my story that, you know, the very same department that I'm heading, I was a student in, and, you know, I started with what we call, you know, offering my service voluntarily as a tutor. And I mean, I think I'm a product that tells you that the university believes in what they are cooking in the kitchen. You know, they baked the cake and now they have to eat it. Yeah. So I think that talks about what Dileka said in terms of sponsorship. I mean, I was given this role when I didn't have the accolades to really lead in this space in terms of qualifications. You know, I didn't have a PhD, but somebody had to step down and say, let's give this person an opportunity. And I'm really grateful for, you know, Professor Danielle van Lille, you know, our dean. And I'm grateful for the male, you know, support. And this is male in a different gender as well, who supported me and really made sure that this sponsorship is real. You know, it's not sponsorship in terms of spoon feeding, but in terms of showing you and supporting you. Hence I said it's a two-way traffic. And God knows that if I didn't have that kind of backup, there was no way that I was going to survive. Not that I don't work hard. I can tell you I work my everything off. You know, I put my mind into it because, you know, there's still that music that plays behind the mind that says, you're doing it for another Black child, you're doing it for another woman, you know, you're doing it for another generation to come, to say, you know, you are sort of like a role model, if I may say, to say it's doable, you know. Of course, I think, you know, I've learned that sitting in a hot seat has a positive impact, such as participating in policies to plan for the future, for including all women, you know, to ensure that we can return to a path of sustainable economic growth and regain the lost ground in gender equality while fighting poverty, inequalities, and so forth. But this, of course, are daunting tasks. I mean, but, you know, gender responsive fiscal policies can help us. But who talks about that? Who represent women? What are the voices that are speaking, you know, on behalf of us as women? So I think the appropriate set of policies will depend, among other things, on, you know, institutions or organizations' level of development and commitment to really give that sponsorship. So I think it's important that we encourage and support the efforts that focus on the production of new technologies, you know, bringing women on board, you know, support women into adapting into these new roles. You know, I remember you know, the first time I sat into a Senate meeting, even though I've been in the university for a long time, I was like, is this what it's all about? You know, I felt like a newbie. I had no idea. But, you know, I had the support of my colleagues who said, this is how we do it, this is what it means, and how you prepare into this. So sponsorship, of course, it's really about stepping down. You know, there are professors who were in the department who could have said, you know, we can challenge this position. And they could have won by all rights. But, you know, they were willing to say, no, we're behind you, go for it. We believe in you. We think you can do it. So I think that's what I'm really, you know, advocating for, to say, Stella, what are you doing to bring other women in? You know, of course, like I said, it's a daunting exercise. But, you know, as women, we are more vulnerable, but we...
I mean, women are also consumers and users of technology. And I think that that's also a space that we need to shape. We need to have the technologies that we feel are the ones that are important for us, and to be able also to use technologies in ways that actually also influences and can bridge the gender gap in and of itself, and to feel that there are safe spaces where we can discuss what we need out of our technologies without feeling that we are highlighting certain issues or putting ourselves in danger, for example. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Njideka.
Right, absolutely. I did have a comment to Dr. Stella. I will wait till she comes back on. But in terms of, you know, women's use of technology, absolutely, we need to be in those innovation spaces. And not from a corporate social responsibility angle. We need to be in product development and those innovation spaces. In the US, you know, Ford, for instance, actually did a survey and some research around, you know, how often women manicure their nails and how long their nails were, to be able to determine the depth at which they built their door handle. So we have power. We have to just understand and be able to use that power we have, because when companies like Ford are looking to women to determine how they develop, you know, the internal dashboard of their doors, it is evident that we matter. We control 80% of consumer spending. So we do matter. We have that power. Again, we just absolutely need to use it. You know, with the advent of the fourth industrial revolution, right, which is, as we know, characterized by the fusion of the physical, the digital, and the biological worlds. A couple of technologies have come into play more recently than not. We've seen 3D printing, we've seen cloud computing, the Internet of Things, robotics, etc. 3D printing is an area that I personally am extremely passionate about, because it really takes this creativity that a lot of, women have in terms of our creativity, our caring nature, and we're able to put that to use in terms of creating physical objects that change our communities and that change the world for good. When you look at the 3D printing industry, it's an industry that about 3-4 years ago was valued about 13 billion, but is growing exponentially and is valued about 64 billion by 2025. The ability for people, irrespective of where you live, to really transform the manufacturing sector, to be able to create products on the spot, develop those products, and actually put those products in the online marketplace for sale, anywhere in the world, is extremely powerful, right? So we're not just talking about creativity, we're also talking about the influence of science and technology, because when you're actually using computer-aided design to create these models, you have, plays of physics and math in your mind, although you might not know you're necessarily learning physics and math, you actually are. And then to be able to connect that with economics and make those items available, to the world for sale is extremely powerful. We've also seen the play in robotics, where, some women, in my world, at Youth for Technology Foundation, have had an interest in developing, robotic arms that can be used in large distilleries and or bakeries, right? So how can we take our caring and empathetic personality, like Juanita mentioned, and use those towards product development that leverage those fourth industrial technologies. We also have a new play around empathetic technologies, right? Over many, many years, women have been known to possess those soft skills, right? As opposed to, manufacturing and construction were usually paired with, empathy, listening skills, the ability to communicate over different countries, so cross-cultural skills and teamwork. Well, those types of technologies in the advent of the fourth industrial revolution are actually going to be more profitable, right? Because irrespective of how much technology you create, we still need highly skilled people, women, to be able to operate these technologies. And those highly skilled women have those soft skills, which in the fourth industrial revolution are more emphasized, because they absolutely have to be, and they're more profitable. So this is where I really see the role of women and our need and importance to upskill girls who will soon be women growing up in developing and or developing worlds, so that they're best positioned for the fourth industrial revolution. And Dr. Stella, you got off for a few minutes, but I meant to mention after your note there, you used the word given, and you weren't actually given the position, you actually earned the position because you have power. And the problem, but one of our issues as women is we don't understand how much power we have. We're very, very competent. We just need that same level of confidence that our male counterparts have. So, you certainly earn the position. And if we look at, years of leaders in that position that you're in, I'm sure you're outperforming them by leaps and bounds. So congratulations.
It's we haven't been able to take that many comments from the audience, but there's been a lot of discussions about this idea of bringing the women to the table, but also the role of men and what men needs to do, and also to, and I think that there's a lot of listening that needs to happen here. But Pumsa is actually saying, it was a man who invited me to the seminar tonight and alerted me to this debate. So, those aspects are important as well. Looking ahead, we're running out of time, unfortunately, but if we have talked a little bit about the role of education, the importance of education, the importance of mentorship, sponsorships, and the idea of leading, women taking charge and being more confident in the context in which they are already operating and so on. This is a very fast-moving space. So I know that the foundation, Juanita, that you co-founded started in 2010. And Jireka, your youth foundation started in 2001. Lots of things have happened. We're now 10 years later in the context of you, Juanita, much later for you. So, but things must have moved forward quite a lot in this time, or at least I hope so. If you would have a looking glass and look five years ahead, or a few years ahead, 10 years ahead, 5 years ahead, what do you see? Stella, you went offline, so let's start with you. Where will we be? Will we have bridged the gender gap in the tech space in 5 years' time?
Absolutely no ways. I mean, like in my opening, I said the reality is that even in my lifetime, I don't think we will really, achieve addressing the gender inequalities. I think if you look at the education or either maybe the institutions themselves, almost everything developed for the 20th century workforce is being dismantled and deconstructed, or either reconstructed rather. But, women also are not going to be an exception in this disruption. They are going to be disrupted, and we need to reevaluate, our roles and how can we participate and grow in the future. And like I said, I think we are really making progress, but hell no, it's not good enough. There is a dire need for lifelong learning to enable women to access learning opportunities in different ways and for different purposes at various career stages. Some women need to upskill, others need to reskill, but we need to build, education models that reflect this change and culture that promises it. So I'm glad that at UJ, the institution that's led by a thought leader in artificial intelligence, we are already modifying our programs to answer to the demands or the skills demands of the fourth industrial revolution. I think we need to gear up on skills development to serve those demands of the industry. And it is also crucial that the tech industry has the support of government and the policymakers at a national and global level, because otherwise we're not going to address these issues. I think those efforts are made to collaborate and in supporting and encouraging more women into the tech and the artificial roles, artificial intelligence roles and careers, from encouraging, girls in STEMs, and creating more open and welcoming environment for women entering the tech space, so we can all contribute to closing the danger of this gender gap in the space. So it is a dangerous space, like I call it, and it needs both men and women to really come on board and hold hands together and say, how do we then address this? And I like what Juanita said, to say, why is HR not doing something about it? You can't say I've advertised, there's no women coming in. So what are these men saying who are sitting in this position for 20 years, 30 years, until they retire without, allowing a woman to come in? Otherwise, we're not going to close this gap, unfortunately, or sadly.
Thank you. And yeah, it's a shame. Time is running away from us here very fast. But Juanita, what do you see if you look ahead a few years?
I have to agree, unfortunately, with Dr. Stella. I wish it was different. I wish I could say that 5 years from now, all of us on this panel is going to come together and we're going to go, we've made it. But unfortunately, I don't think so. But I think having these conversations are critical. I think raising awareness, like Pums, who herself is a phenomenal leader in the sector, and, somebody that fights really hard, for women, women rights. I think, we have to just continue to have these conversations. And I think as women, we've got to stop asking for permission. This is not about asking for permission. We've just got to take our rightful space. And these sort of platforms, I think, play a critical role. And as we continue to come together, I think, these things, and as a lobbyist and somebody that has worked in that environment for a really long time, you also know that how these things build up. And women will get to the point where we'll be over the conversation. We will have had the conversation. And it's at that point where we draw the line in the sand, that we say, now it's time. Now we want actual laws. We want policies in place that is actually going to fast track how we do that. But this is sort of where we start. These are the, we have to have these conversations. We can't skip these conversations because this is part of the process that also educates us and makes us helps us to redefine ourselves. But yeah, this has been a phenomenal platform, and this is so critical in a critical step in the process.
Yeah. No, thanks for that. Just to wrap up very, very quickly, unfortunately and sadly, and Judeka, I have 3 boys, you have 3 girls. Will we see in a few years' time, will we see my boys reporting to your girls rather than the other way around?
Rather than the other way around, absolutely. My life goal is actually to raise my daughters ages 16, 12, and 12 to be brave girls, right? And so they can be whoever they want to be, right? The sky is the limit. And so they get to define, who they want to be. Though I love tech, of course, and that is most of my corporate background, we're not pushing them necessarily into tech. It's whatever skills that they've developed and, what they enjoy doing, that is really my preference. So really leaving a legacy where my girls are brave is extremely, extremely important. But I think, in 5 years, no, we would not have reached gender parity by any regards, but we will have made some progress. Like many of the other panelists have mentioned, having men allies like your sons, Dr. Ilva, will be a good, pathway to kind of bridging this gender parity and bridging this gap. I do think that we've made much progress. It, however, involves all hands on deck. Civil society, nonprofits cannot do it alone. The private sector can't do it alone. The government can't do it alone. We really need all hands on deck to be able to get us closer to bridging this gender parity, where over 60% of CEOs in Africa say that what keeps them up at night is having individuals that have the right skills to fit these jobs, that we don't know what these jobs necessarily are going to look like in the 4th Industrial Revolution. Where we can bridge that gap is by having industry in our classrooms, co-creating and developing content with us so that we are preparing young people, particularly girls and women, to fill those roles that, are keeping their CEOs up at night. And so really, really looking at that, I think, as long as we are focused on the bottom line and the economic imperative, which most of industry is very focused on, we will bridge that gender parity, right? Ernst & Young last year, they did a survey with over 200 companies that demonstrated that where women are in C-suite positions, it raises net revenue by about 6%, right, globally. And so, it's really, really an economic imperative where we've seen female founded led companies get VC funding by 50% less than their male counterparts. However, they're able to raise revenue by 20% or more. It's clear, right? It is clear. Investing in women is an economic imperative. And I'm sure that knowing that and living through those values is definitely going to bridge that gender parity that we so all desire over the next couple of years.
Thank you. That's I think that's a positive thing, that we need to think through those things, but also I think that's a positive ending to the discussion, this idea that actually the power is there because technology is there for of course, for both men and women, but that we have the power to change it from an economic imperative as well. So thank you. Time passes very, very quickly, and I've been absolutely grateful. It's been such a pleasure to have you here with us tonight, and to have an all-female panel as well to talk about these issues, of course, is also hugely gratifying. So thank you to you all, and thank you to the audience as well. I realized that we haven't been able to channel a lot of the comments that've been on the chat box, but I think that we've covered a lot of ground and a lot of the things that have been said in the chat box as well. We'll come back to this topic for sure. And we will have other discussions to follow as well. Thank you very, very much. Have a lovely evening, everyone. And I hope to see you soon. And we will do our first cloud debate, hopefully early on in the new year, in 2020. And hopefully then we can all be together in the studio again, even though we have our audience online. So have a lovely evening, everyone. God bless, and see you soon.
The University of Johannesburg. The future reimagined.